It seems not even our military are safe from encountering unexplainable cryptic creatures. These subscribers today share their stories, whether it be out on deployment or just exploring their local hometown woods. These people see some incredibly unexplainable and terrifying things. I hope you enjoy these stories they share today. I've had many paranormal experiences, but this one was the first, and it will be something that I will never forget. Before I tell the story, many of you will have different reactions, and that is your right. But what I'm about to tell you really happened to me. I remember that it was during the summer, and I was about 9 years old. My mom wanted me to go to summer school, which I hated. I didn't want to waste my summer in school, but what could I do? The elementary school I had to go to was not far from where I lived, which was not much to complain about. While going to the school, I heard rumors that the school was haunted, especially one of the girls' restrooms that was in the very creepy hallway and far from the classrooms. Sadly, during summer, that restroom was the only one opened. Usually, I would go there during recess and lunch when there were many girls. However, whenever classes were in session, and it seemed that no girl wanted to step in that bathroom. Whenever I walked in the hallway, I would notice that 2 groups of 3 girls would enter the restroom together, and one would just go to the restroom while the other stood as they were keeping watch. There were times when I walked into the restroom while the others stood there, and I just couldn't figure it out. There were random girls that I never knew of, sometimes just in the hall around that bathroom. They would ask me if I could go to that bathroom with them, and when I asked why, they told me they were too scared to go in there alone. I once asked the girls about what was so scary about that particular restroom. One of the girls told me that there was a girl that died in that restroom and now she haunts it. Girls who entered the restroom alone would see her. I don't know how this girl died or what, but I didn't bother to ask, because I never really thought too much of it. Also, I thought all the girls were crazy and made up the stories, but I soon learned that this was not the case. It was a Thursday morning, and my teacher told me to take the attendance sheets to the office, which I did. As I was walking back to class, I felt nature was calling, and I had to go to the restroom. I walked everywhere to see if there were restrooms that were open, and to my luck, the haunted restroom was the only one that was open for the girls. I remembered all the stories about it, and I looked around if there was another student that was nearby, and there wasn't. I stood in the front, and then I called out to anyone. Hello? Only my echoes were heard. As I stepped closer and closer to the restroom, I felt a chill in my spine. My heart was beating loudly and rapidly. I felt scared, terrified. I didn't want to go in, but I really had to go, and I didn't want to wet myself. I gathered my courage and went inside, alone. The bathroom was old. There was writing on the walls and mirrors. Trash was everywhere, and some of the door locks of cubicles, or would have been broken, were not even there. You could just see through their holes through the door. I immediately went in and closed the door. The chill of fear never left me. As I was doing my business, I heard footsteps, and I called out to see if it was another girl. Hello? Is anyone there? I got no response. My nervousness intensified, and I looked down to the door to take a peek. I saw legs of what belonged to a girl, I think. I saw that she wore white socks, worn out black shoes, and her skin was pale, and I mean deathly pale. Something that looked out of the ordinary. I felt my nervousness turn into fear, and I dared not to look further. When I finished using the toilet, I could not get out of the cubicle. My gut feeling told me not to get out. I felt that she was still there, waiting for me. I called out to her again, hoping for a response. Hello? Are you there? Still no response. Slowly, I looked down to see if she was in the same spot that she stood. She wasn't. I saw her feet, but this time they were in front of the cubicle that I was in, and I felt that I was going to have a heart attack at any moment. Never in my life I felt this much fear. I wanted to cry. I told the unknown girl, "Please, leave me alone." I still received no response, and I could see that the feet were still from afar. To my luck, the bell rang and it was recess time. A lot of girls entered the bathroom. I was still in the cubicle as the fear overwhelmed me. Slowly, I got out, and once I did, the girls looked at me and noticed my scared form. I asked them, "Did you see the girl when she came in?" Many of the girls asked me if I was okay. I told them what happened, and I kid you not, all the girls in the bathroom were silent. No one said or did a thing. They all told me. They believed me and told me I was crazy for coming into the restroom alone. But I admired my courage. When the teacher asked me what happened to me, I lied and said I felt sick and went to puke at the restroom, but felt better. I was a good student back then and the teacher believed me. Ever since then, I never went inside that restroom. And luckily, the janitor opened the other girls' restroom because of the complaints that the parents made about their kids not making it to the restroom. I would never forget my experience. I don't know if it was an actual ghost or a girl trying to play a prank. It makes me wonder if students, specifically female students, experienced the same thing as I did when I was a child. This happened to me back in 2011 when I was 19. I live in Sydney, Australia, and this happened on a country back road on the outskirts of the city at a place called Picton. Myself and 4 of my high school buddies decided to go for a drive with no particular destination in mind. We jumped on the highway at about 8 p.m. It was summer, so the sun was beginning to set. We took an exit off the highway and began driving down a few rural roads. Being that we had no destination in mind, and that we were more focused on the music blasting out of the speakers, we eventually got lost. There was a full moon that night, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. After a while, we saw a car pull out from the side road about 100 meters in front of us. From the height of its red tail lights, it looked to be a sedan. Being lost, we decided to follow the car. We did have signal on our phones and could have easily charted a route on Google Maps, but decided against it to see if we could find a way back by following this car. I know, dumb. We maintained the 100-meter gap between us and the car and followed at 80 kilometers per hour. We eventually came to a long, straight dirt road with large treeless fields on both sides. We then saw the car's taillights make a left turn up ahead, and we thought finally, we can get off this straight stretch of road. This is when things get very creepy. We arrived to the turn about 10 seconds after the car turned off, but there was no turn off, just a dead end. There was an old rusty metal gate that was clearly locked with an equally rusty chain and padlock leading to an overgrown driveway with no clear tire tracks. There was no way in how that the driver could have unlocked the gate and driven down the driveway in 10 seconds it took us to reach it. Even if they did, we would have seen the headlights and tail lights going down the driveway regardless. And if for some reason they decided to switch them off, we would have still seen the cars. The terrain was very flat and with a full moon. We all confirmed that we saw something. To this day, I still can't explain what happened. Did the car somehow evade our vision? Or was the lost soul returning to their earthly home after a tragic event? I'll never know. Even today, a few years later, all of my friends and myself remember this. In the early 2000s, I had lived in South Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was a little bit of a rough neighborhood, and still is, but in comparison, it's not the worst part of the city. During that time, I was living in a very old house my family called the South House, due to being in the southern part of the city. It's probably 100 years old or so. I don't remember exactly when it was made. Despite its age, it's quite a decent-looking little home that sits on the corner of an intersection. But I had a strange feeling about this house before I even moved in. While it was still for sale, I used to keep driving over to it and parking on the street directly across from the house. I would just sit there and stare at it with a weird feeling, thinking that this house is not normal. I eventually set aside my strange feeling of the place and bought it. I moved in with my dog named Magnum. He was a brindle-colored pit bull, and he was the most fearless dog I had ever seen. He scared the shit out of people and other dogs. He definitely kept me safe in this old house, which is all I could afford at the time. But perhaps I should have picked a different place to live because strange things began to happen. I remember one day, I looked out my front window to see an old man standing on the other side of the street, looking as if he was going to cross it. He had long black and gray hair, and he was wearing some kind of old style clothing, definitely not modern. After a few seconds, when I had blinked, the old man was gone. That wasn't the last of him, though. Time and time again, I heard cars swarming around, horns honking, and even accidents outside. During those incidents, I had asked people what had happened, and they swore they saw an old man walk into the middle of the street without even looking. Every single time this happened, the old man was never found. I can imagine that the police are getting tired of this story. Who would believe that some guy kept disappearing? I remember other times, I started hearing a commotion from upstairs. It sounded like people were running around up there. But every time I checked, there was never anyone up there. But it got stranger than that. Normally, I would keep all the upstairs rooms closed, except for the one and only bathroom in the place, which I would also leave the light on for whenever I had to make my way to the bathroom during the night. But one morning, I went to use the bathroom and the light was off. Also, the master bedroom down the hallway was wide open. I wasn't sure how that happened, but it wasn't the only time that it did. Every night after that, I would turn on the bathroom light, which had a stiff switch, one that you really had to snap to turn off. I also made sure the master bedroom door was closed by rattling it. Then I would go to bed. Every morning it was the same. The bathroom light would be off, and the master door would be wide open. It was so strange. After that, I figured there might be a spirit in the home. Maybe a few, or maybe someone was sneaking into my house at night. So, I was on high alert after that. At this point, people would have called the police or gotten the hell out of there. But I didn't. I stuck around since I didn't know for sure if there was a ghost or not. But things only got worse. One day, I came home from my security job to find my dog Magnum looking very shaken and scared for some reason. I really wasn't sure why, because he was always fearless. Honestly, I really wasn't scared of the noises that I heard upstairs before or anything like that. So Magnum knew something that I did not, and it was really scaring him. Well, oh man, did I find out what it was, and it scared the living daylights out of me. What happened was that I heard loud footsteps upstairs. It wasn't the same running footsteps I heard before. These were very loud, heavy footsteps, and I thought someone broke into my house by climbing up the second-story window. I then heard the footsteps slowly but loudly start making their way downstairs, coming from what sounded like a big guy wearing heavy boots. I quickly grabbed my revolver and stood behind a makeshift curtain that I had hung in the doorway to separate the living room from the hall, which had the stairs on the other side. A few feet from the doorway, I waited as the footsteps made their way down the stairs, and I was going to present myself with a gun as soon as this person stepped onto the creaky step at the bottom of the stairs. Once I heard the creak, I whipped back the curtain, expecting some big guy to be there with a gun in his face. And at that moment, my heart sank. Because There was no one there. I let go of the curtain, letting it close. Do you know that feeling of sudden fear when your heart sinks into your stomach? It's like an oh crap feeling when your body is shaking, your heart is pounding, your hair is standing up, and you can almost feel the fear running through your veins. It's the feeling you get when you know something is wrong. Horribly wrong. Even after that day, I didn't move out. I was still living in that terrifying home. And that situation at the stairs was not the end of it. I remember another time a picture floated off the wall almost to my face before falling to the floor. Another time, where the mouse trap in the pantry snapped and there was a loud crash in the kitchen where I found the stove had been moved well out of place. Also, almost hitting the gas line in the wall behind it. I checked the pantry to look at the mousetrap, but it was gone. I searched the pantry and the kitchen up and down, all over, but I couldn't find it. I, still to this day, have never seen that mousetrap again. Did the ghost take it? Did it snap on him and make him angry enough to smash my stove? That must have been one hell of a strong ghost. More like a poltergeist if he could do that. I wonder what it could have done if it could move my stove that way. So, eventually came the time where I had enough. I made sure every light in the house was off and I waited until night. Once darkness consumed every room, I grabbed my Bible, my cross. I then proceeded to loudly recite Hail Mary prayers and then saying, "The power of God commands you, and you are dead, go to the light." Out loud through every room on both floors, including the basement. After I performed an exorcism on the entire house, that was the last of the problems I had with the ghost. I never heard a peep ever again. I eventually allowed my 4-year-old nephew to visit me and see Magnum for the first and last time. Unfortunately, Magnum passed away, and so I was there alone until I got a new dog that was nicer by nature. I had lived in the South house for a few years before selling it to my brother and moving out. He let her mother move into it, who lived there for a few years with several cats and dogs, until the house burned in a fire. She made it out safely, but unfortunately, none of her pets did. Even after the fire, the house was still standing, and so my brother remodeled the entire house and eventually sold it. The South house was very extraordinary, nothing like I had ever seen before. It has a long story behind it. It has been through a lot over the years, and as far as I know, after getting rid of the ghost there, the South house has been peaceful ever since. This story takes place almost a year ago exactly. I work at a private school in California. I'm a teaching assistant and work for our after-school care program. My coworker, who I'll call M, and I have always thought our work was haunted. Well, I always knew it was. She thought it might be. Doors would open and close on their own. We'd hear voices and footsteps. Toys would be left in strange places after we put them away for the day. We'd see things out of the corner of our eyes. You name it, it happened. It also didn't help that we were always the last people on campus. If anything, it just upped the creepy factor. While all these occurrences were definitely unsettling, this story was one of the most disturbing. Like I said earlier, we're pretty sure it's haunted, and decide to go around the building with holy water, incense, and praying, and telling whatever spirits that were there that they need to leave. Thinking this worked, we went home. The next day, Em and I were working with pre-K. In our pre-K building, there's a loft. Em was sitting at the table right in front of the loft when one of our pre-K kids came up and sat in her lap. She had her head on Em's shoulder and told Em there's a little boy up there. Em looked up at the loft and saw that no one was in the loft. She called the little girl silly for trying to trick her and saying there's nobody up there. But the little girl was adamant. He's right there, but you can't see him because he's hiding from you. Needless to say, Em was a bit creeped out, but told the girl, well, he can come down here and play when he's ready. She said okay and laid her head back on Miss M's shoulder. A minute or two goes by when A's head whips up and exclaimed, "But don't lock him in there. He doesn't want to be locked in there. Now, M is thoroughly freaked out and tells me what happened with the girl. In doing so, I make a horrifying realization. While going through the building with holy water the night before, I hadn't used the water in the loft. He had already locked it up for the night, and I just hadn't thought about it. Now, here's where we feel into that horror movie cliche. We had bought a Ouija board the previous Halloween but had never used it. And it just sat in its box in the back of the car for almost a year. So like idiots, we decided to use the board. We knew using the board at school was a terrible idea, so we drove down the street to the marina. We start using the board and ask if someone is here. The spirit comes through the board saying his name is Daniel, that he's a young boy. Daniel tells us that, including himself, there are 3 spirits in our particular building. A female spirit named Maria and a bad spirit. While M believed the board, I was rather skeptical. I had been able to feel when spirits are around me ever since I was little. I had only ever felt one spirit in that building, and I knew it was bad news. But I kept that information to myself. So, Daniel tells us that he and Maria are afraid of the other spirits, and that it is very mad at me for trying to make it leave, saying that it wants to hurt me. Daniel also continuously gave us the number 5 along with a string of other numbers. We closed the session so we could figure out what those numbers meant. I had thought, what if it's a phone number? And turns out I was right. 3 of our coworkers had the same first 4 numbers of their phone numbers. For example, it was like 1234. We then returned to the board and asked if something was going to happen to our 3 coworkers. The board said yes. We asked if someone meant the harm, and again it said yes. Not much happened after that. We closed the session and went home. Upon returning to work the next day, I went up to the little girl and asked her about the boy in the loft. I asked if she knew his name or what he looked like. At first she was hesitant but responded with, "His name is Daniel, and he has dark hair, dark eyes, and gray skin." I asked if she meant pale skin, and she said no, got up and brought me a gray marker and said, "Gray, like the marker." Needless to say, M was freaked out and walked out of the room. Then I asked the girl if there was anyone else that liked to hide up there, like Daniel does. She told me no, all the while looking around the room to make sure as Daniel wasn't nearby. I asked her if she was sure and she said yes. She also told me that Daniel scares her, that he's not very nice, and that he yelled at her for telling us about him. I cemented what M believed and I already knew. The pre-K building was definitely haunted. It also meant I was right. Daniel wasn't who he said he was. A few weeks go by. Em and I have all but forgotten about the board giving us our coworker's number. Mostly because we'd been so busy with work and life. That is until the 3 of them went on a trip with 2 of their friends. The group of 5 traveled to Route 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas. They were in the middle of the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. They survived and were unharmed. It didn't take long for Am and I to pull the pieces together. The shooting took place exactly 5 weeks after we used the Ouija board. Leading up to the shooting, almost all the activity had died down. As soon as our coworkers returned, so did the activity. Only now, it seemed more intense and happened more frequently, to the point where students were staring and starting to see that things were happening. So, I went through the building again, only this time I didn't use a Catholic prayer. You see, while I was born and raised Catholic, I'd had a falling out with Catholicism. As I've mentioned before, I'd always been able to feel spirits around me, something my extremely Catholic mother did not like. Feeling ostracized for being different and a variety of other reasons, I found my way to Wicca, and I've been Wiccan ever since. So, this time I ran around the building, burning sage and performing a cleansing ritual. I also made sure to close and seal the board and any door we may have unintentionally left open. So, it seems to be working so far. I'm usually rather hesitant to tell the story just because I know it sounds crazy. And as much as I wished I was making it up, It is the truth. It was definitely one of the scariest encounters I have ever had. Locations have been altered, names have been changed, and nothing overtly explicit is put down to prevent operational security risk and statute of limitations and such. During one of my employments, I was sent to Guatemala. Originally, we were sent there to provide humanitarian relief after a hurricane. This quickly escalated, as during this time a local cartel was doing a considerable amount of beheadings at the border. While nothing escalated into direct conflict, things were always tense, and there wasn't a day that we didn't find a body or two along the side of the road. One night, while on fire guard, my guard partner Rodriguez had called out to me and identified a woman was limping up the road and to our forward operating base. We were only a few miles out from the nearest village and a fair ways up to the mountain. More importantly, Rodriguez was a big guy, far from being easily scared, and yet he sounded off, nervous, and notably concerned. At first, I assumed it was likely some passerby that was wandering somewhere drunk. However, when I arrived, it was obvious that the issue was and why exactly he was so concerned. The woman appeared thin and unbelievably pale. She was wearing a floral patterned dress that was torn at the legs. Her wrists and ankles had deep marks on them, as though she had been struggling against restraints. And there was blood running down her leg. Her movements were slow, jerky, and unnatural. She looked like she'd been hit by a truck or something. My immediate thought was this woman had somehow managed to get away from the cartel. They were more than brutal enough to do something like this. Thinking back now, if only I had been right. I approached the woman, cycling back between English and Spanish, with Rodriguez stating that he was going to go alert the watch commander. He didn't even make it halfway before I alerted him to the fact that the woman had stopped moving. She was just standing there, swaying slightly in the middle of the road, her face covered by her matted hair. And the stench was awful. Never mind not having bathed in weeks, this woman smelled like outright death. Another thing that I had noticed, that the mountain had become silent. Truly silent. Not even bugs buzzing around, which is outright unheard of in the mountains of Guatemala. It was unnervingly still. Rodriguez and I approached the woman carefully, again cycling through English and Spanish, as we weren't certain what it was this woman was speaking. We called out to her, asking if she was okay and what her name was, but no response. The closer we got to her, the stronger the stench of rot became. Calling out one last time, I reached out to her and placed a hand on her shoulder, at which point she began shrieking. Not just yelling, but shrieking. It was this powerful, haunting cry as though the woman had been set on fire, and she lashed out at both of us, sending us flying. Now, keep in mind, Rodriguez and I are both fairly built, and at the time, we were in full battle gear, which added a solid 130 pounds or so to our weight, meaning we were both well over 300 pounds. And this woman, this frail, thin, almost bony woman, flung us nearly 20 feet, knocking us both onto our backs. The woman continued to shriek and bolted into the nearby foliage. Shocked, we radioed our watch commander. He told us to stand by. Can't imagine the damage she or it could have done to us if we had not been in our gear. My vest was fine, but my partner's vest was cracked in the front where she had punched him. And if that wasn't enough, we were shut down almost immediately by our higher-ups. We were relieved from duty and told to go to bed. I wasn't able to sleep that night. I kept hearing distant shrieks, and the people that were assigned to relieve us of our duty were a pair of 4. Not just 2, as would normally happen. The next morning, we were debriefed. We were essentially told this didn't happen, and we were both transferred to two completely different operating bases. To this day, I have no idea what happened, what was wrong with that woman, or if it was actually a woman at all. But I'll never forget that shriek, and I'll never forget that smell. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit that thumbs up as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button and hit that notification button because you don't want to miss another video